Okay, folks, we're not going to be sat in this position very long. So how about, could I just ask who is here for the first time this evening? Okay, so a few of you. And who has never meditated before? Anybody never meditated before? Okay, a few as well. Okay, great. Well, very, very warm welcome, especially to you if it's your first time here this evening. Sandra, could you, and we're live as well with the folks online, so very, very warm welcome to the folks online as well. Sandra, would you mind just drawing both of those curtains for me? That would be great. So everybody else, what we can do is what we usually do is just start with a bit of a body scan here at the Wednesday night class. So what we'll do is we'll lie down, and we can have our head facing up this side of the wall and then our feet facing this side of the wall. So why don't you pull yourselves that way? Yeah. I'll dim the lights here. So do you want to go to this? Sorry, do you want to go to this one here? You can just shift this mat here. Yeah. So usually then what we do is we can just have our knees up, and you can let your knees just fall into each other. And what you can do just to stop your feet from sliding is to just peel your socks halfway down your foot, and that way your heel will just stop your feet from sliding down. Good, so you can have your hands just rested on your stomach. And you can do this at home as well. If you're watching online, you can do this at home. Just allow your neck to lengthen out away from your shoulders. Come on in. Welcome. Do you want to just grab, there's a mat here, you can use this one. Just allow your back to relax down onto the floor. So allowing your lower back just to completely relax onto the floor. And you're allowing all your body weight just to relax down. So allowing your knees just to fall in, to take their own weight. Allowing your shoulders just to spread out and relax onto the floor. Just scanning your body for any gripping or any holding, anywhere that you're tensing. Just seeing if you can completely relax it. So relaxing the large muscles of the legs. Relaxing the gut. Relaxing the shoulders down away from the ears, relaxing the muscles of the face. So no need now to hold the face in any particular position, just allowing everything just to relax. In particular, aware of our connection with the floor. So one way to establish mental stability is to just connect with stability in the body. So you can bring to awareness the connection with the floor, and our weight really just stabilizing down, relaxing down into that. we can just bring our awareness to any emotional sensation that we feel in the body. So we feel our mood and our emotions in the body physically. And then often manifest around the gut, around the solar plexus, around the heart area. So just noticing if there's any emotional sensation around that area. But we can feel anxiety around the gut or excitement around the gut. We might feel anger in the throat. Or there might not be very much there at all, and that's okay too. And then just being aware of your whole body. So bringing your whole body into awareness. So in a minute we'll begin to get up. Just noticing any resistance to that if it comes up. And just relaxing into it again. just now roll onto our side and then bring ourselves up onto a seated position. So very, very warm welcome to the Wednesday evening class. My name's Amalayodhin, so what I'll do is I'll guide us through the rest of the evening. And like I say, we're mixing two of the classes this evening, and we have people joining us from online. So it'll be a bit different from what we usually do. The structure might be a bit different, but let me just check again. Who's here for the first time this evening? There was a few people came in there. Okay, good. Right. Hopefully that'll be fine. I think that'll be okay. In the title of this talk, it was meant to be the culmination, basically, of a series of about 5 talks that was given on the, I think 10 talks actually that were given on the 5 spiritual faculties. The 5 spiritual, I've put myself on the spot now. The 5 spiritual faculties are energy, faith, wisdom, concentration, mindfulness, and energy, faith, wisdom. That's it. 5. So we've had a series of talks over the last 10 weeks on those 5 faculties. So they're the sort of said to be the kind of the base rock, the 5 sort of faculties that we really need to train to make spiritual progress. So energy, faith, wisdom, mindfulness, concentration. Those 5. And the title that I was given this evening was to say how to bring all of them into your meditation practice, which is the most ridiculous title I've ever heard in my life. There's absolutely no way that I'm going to try and give a talk on bringing all of the 5 spiritual faculties in about 30 minutes of teaching time into your meditation practice. So, what I thought I might do actually is just talk very generally about systems of practice, because of meditation is a system of practice and Buddhism is a system of practice, and you've had schools sort of lineages go down through the years with systems of practice. So I thought I might just talk a little bit about that, and then I'll say a little bit about the Metta Bhavana as well. We're going to do a Metta Bhavana, and I'll say a bit about the Metta Bhavana to people who's the first time here this evening as well. I'll guide us through that as we go. Yeah. The 5 spiritual faculties are basically a system of practice. They're 5 things that we sort of need to look at in a sort of holistic sense, in a kind of whole, in order to make progress in the spiritual life, in order to sort of develop as human beings. The spiritual life is really, it's just sort of grandiose way of saying to develop as human beings. Now, it's a much bigger vision than, development in the sort of self-development sense. So it's not just about, becoming more effective at work or becoming, better at romance or better in the gym or whatever it might be. All of that is as good as it is. Spiritual life really, well, what it evokes is the vision that the Buddha saw on his enlightenment, the moment he attained enlightenment 2,500 years ago, which is really the perfection of all that it means to be human. So really the kind of flowering, the flourishing of all that it means to be human. So the perfection of all the human faculties, all the sort of human virtues, the complete elimination of any negativity, of any ill will, craving, delusion, any of those things, greed, any of those things. So that's what's really the Buddha's vision. So that's what the 5 spiritual faculties, when we talk about a system of practice, that's what it's aimed at. It's aimed at, this enlightened vision of the Buddha. So really, I think one of the first things to say about a system of practice is that it stands or it falls together. So if you have a system of practice, and I mean by a system of practice, I mean anything. I mean, say, a spiritual system or a meditation system or a system of training music or a system of training dance. Anything where you have a way of sort of practicing, a method of practice, a system of practice, it kind of all stands or falls in one go. It's got a kind of internal cohesion to it. Whereas if you start sort of playing around with it, the whole thing kind of collapses. It's sort of a bit like an ecosystem in that way, like an ecosystem. I don't know very much about environmentalism, but apparently if you mess around with the environment or an ecosystem of kind of flowers or animals, if you change one thing, the whole thing goes a bit haywire because the whole thing has got a sort of internal kind of logic to it. It's not like you can sort of change one bit and all the rest just kind of continues sort of going along as it was. If you change one thing, the whole thing changes. Sometimes the whole thing collapses if you change one thing. So these sort of systems of training kind of like have an internal logic to them that you need to sort of go about them all in a sort of whole package, or the whole thing kind of like changes, it all falls apart. So say, for example, if you had a music system, like many of you will have learnt a musical instrument at one point. I didn't, I'm afraid. But lots of you will have learnt a musical instrument at one point. You wouldn't have gone with a musical instrument, say, along to one teacher who was teaching one way of doing it, and then when you began at least, and then another teacher who was teaching another way of doing it, and then another teacher who was teaching another. You just get confused. They'd sort of kind of undermine each other because they'd all have a different way of kind of teaching you. Well, it's really the same with meditation practice or with Dharma practice, with spiritual practice. It's the same sort of idea. So what we often like to do with systems of practice is we generally like to sort of pick and choose, don't we? We go, oh yeah, well, I've read a bit of Vedanta and I quite like that bit. I quite like little bits of Vedanta. I quite like little bits of sort of, I don't know, Sufism or Kabbalah or Gnostic Christianity or something like that. And I sort of take and choose. This is the tendency. This is what we do, don't we? We sort of take and choose little bits that we kind of like, and then we put it together in our own sort of little school of religion or spirituality. We kind of our own kind of like form of spirituality that we've sort of created from a sort of pick and mix of kind of lots of different spiritual systems. We invent our own sort of thing. And usually what this is related to is our strengths and weaknesses. And I know when I do this sort of thing, usually it's related to, well, I'm good at this, and this, and I like this, and this, but I'm not so good at this, and this, and I don't like this, and this, and this, so I'll just leave it out. So I'll take all the sort of the bits that I like and I'm good at, and I'll sort of let go all of the bits that I don't like, that I'm not so good at. And of course, what then happens is I've got a sort of system of practice that completely kind of plays up to my sort of, well, my strengths, the bits that I'm already reasonably sort of proficient at, and doesn't challenge me in any way at the bits that I'm not particularly proficient at all. It allows me to sort of stay quite weak or quite sort of far behind in areas that I'm not so good at. So this is what we sort of do, don't we? I don't know if people might have this experience of like, you go to the gym. I've got a member of this energy fitness gym down the road here, and I go, you always get those guys who work out their arms like 5 days a week. They do the massive big upper bodies and these tiny little twiggy legs, don't they? It's sort of like, oh, come on, do a squat. You just want to scream at them, do a squat or something like that, and shout them. So they've this, they've developed their own kind of system, which is like, I want big biceps or big massive kind of like beach body shoulders or whatever it is, and they've then decided, I don't know, leg work is for somebody else, wusses or something like that, right? So they go around with these enormous kind of upper bodies and tiny little legs. So we can do the equivalent of that in our spiritual life, actually. I think I think it's very, very easy to do that. When we first come along to Buddhism or the spiritual life, what we can often do is we can go, well, I quite like the study, I quite like the sort of the mindfulness bits, but I don't like ethics so much. That really doesn't interest me very much. And I don't like, I don't know, friendship or something like that. So I'm going to do lots of the study and lots of the meditation, and then I'm not going to do any of the rest of the bits of it. Now you can see what can happen, doesn't it? You sort of become the spiritual sort of equivalent of the guy who does upper body work 5 times a week. You sort of grow in a particular direction, very, very sort of one-sidedly. You kind of like, you fall way back in other aspects of what it means to be human. And what it means to be human really kind of involves all 5 of these spiritual faculties: energy, wisdom, mindfulness, faith, devotion, concentration. And being truly human, being fully human involves all of those aspects. And then we go in through sort of developing our sort of school of thought around our own system. We just develop in one area. So in Buddhism, sometimes you get these figures of the Nagas, and the Nagas sort of their role is, traditionally, this is sort of doctrinally, their role is to kind of guard the doctrine of the Dharma. So the sort of the Buddhist teaching, to sort of guard it mythically, sort of cosmically. They're kind of these cosmic mythic figures. And they have these enormous, great big sort of heads and these tiny little thin bodies. So this is how sometimes they're depicted. I don't think you have any in here, but sometimes you'll see them depicted. They have enormous, big, massive heads from all the study that they do, because their sort of role is study. What they do is like they contain vast amounts of knowledge, but they don't actually practice it. They don't actually practice Buddhism at all, or sort of spirituality or meditation at all. So they've got these tiny little sort of snake's bodies. So sometimes you hear the saying in Buddhism, people will talk about dragon's head and snake's body. Which is the idea that like somebody is just full of sort of information about Buddhism, but they've got no sort of real weight of practice behind them. So this is what we do, don't we? We sort of go, when we sort of just kind of pick and choose our own sort of spiritual system, we decide, well, we like that bit, so I'll do that bit, but I don't like those bits. And so what then happens is we sort of grow in very kind of lopsided ways. You know, you could imagine, say, for example, one of the things that Bhante Sangharakshita, the man who founded the Triratna movement, one of the things he said is that really to grow, we need to grow like cabbages. So like a cabbage, you know, a cabbage sort of comes out of the ground and then it grows in all directions simultaneously, doesn't it? You wouldn't have a cabbage that sort of grows a big massive limb out sort of here, and then it, you know, you don't get odd shaped cabbages like that, do you? So, well, maybe you do. But really what happens is you sort of grow like a cabbage. So really to sort of grow in any kind of significant sense as a human being, which is to say to grow spiritually, we sort of need to grow in all areas. We need to be aware of all aspects of ourselves, and we need to sort of bring it up. We can't allow ourselves just to fall back in certain areas. I'll say a little bit more about this in the second half. But you could easily imagine sort of like, I don't know, taking certain aspects of meditation practice or spiritual practice and going, okay, you know, you could become a naga, you could have a dragon's head and a snake's body, or you become a recluse, you know, you could become really sort of interested in meditation, but not interested in sort of the outgoing aspects of spiritual life, like friendship or ethics or anything like that, or generosity or whatever it might be. You could just sort of become more and more kind of inward looking. And this sometimes happens to people, you know, they just become more and more kind of interested in their internal states. So that's maybe where you'd sort of overemphasize mindfulness. You take sort of mindfulness or concentration and you overemphasize it, and all of a sudden you just become a bit of a recluse. So that's not the aim of spiritual life, or of, you know, the Buddha's vision for people. Really what he saw was human beings that were fully developed in all these sort of spiritual faculties, the faculties of, you know, outgoingness, generosity, friendship, love, patience, energy, devotion, all of those sorts of areas, really. So we can think of the Metta Bhavana, and I'll explain a little bit about the Metta Bhavana in a second, and then we're going to do it. But we could think of the Metta Bhavana as a system. So sometimes, the Metta Bhavana is classic, isn't it? Because a lot of the times people don't do it. They're like, I prefer the mindfulness of breathing, so I'll stick with that one, and then we don't do the Metta Bhavana. So that's the first, your first problem is you've kind of like dropped this whole kind of like meditation that's related to other people. So that in itself is a problem. But then often what we do with the Metta Bhavana is we go through it and we sort of drop the stages that we don't like. So, we might decide that, I quite like the sort of the fifth stage. But I don't like the fourth. So I like the stage where we send metta to love to all living beings. But I don't like the fourth one. I don't like it when we have to send love to somebody I don't like. So I'm not going to do that one. Now you can see what happens, can't you? You saw all of a sudden you can very easily become very good at sending love to this sort of abstract concept called all living beings. All living beings are not a thing. You cannot meet all living beings. You cannot shake their hands. It's a sort of abstraction. It's made up of individuals, and often those individuals that are quite difficult. Yeah, they're sort of people that you don't necessarily get on with. So you could see how the sort of Metta Bhavana needs to be sort of treated as a whole system. So in the first stage of the Metta Bhavana, we send well-wishing to ourselves. In the second stage to a good friend, in the third stage to a neutral person, in the fourth stage to a difficult person, and in the fifth stage to all living beings. Sometimes we're not very good at sort of sending metta to ourselves, and that will have an effect on how much metta, how much love and well-wishing we can give to others. Sometimes we might really have no problem with sending metta to somebody that we really like, but we might find it really, really hard to do it for people that we don't like. So you could see how actually what the Metta Bhavana is there for is to try and encourage us to develop love in all its sort of, in kind of all its various ways, and to all the various people that we come across in our day. We could just do it where you just sort of sit down and send metta to all living beings. You might find that you have a great sort of experience over half an hour or 40 minutes doing that. But practically the effect and then going out to the world will not be the same if you've done it with absolutely everybody in the actual practice. So the Metta Bhavana is a system like that, and if you were to sort of change one aspect of it, it's not that you've just changed one aspect and left all of it sort of intact, the rest of it intact. You've changed all of it. All the parts of the Metta Bhavana talk to each other. Yeah. So if you really want to send metta to ourselves, for example, if you really want to be well-wishing to ourselves, loving towards ourselves, you have to be able to send metta or love or friendliness to somebody that you don't like, because partly we won't like ourselves at times. We'll find ourselves difficult in some sort of way. If you can't be forgiving and loving to somebody else who you find difficult, you'll find it very, very hard to be able to do it when we find ourselves difficult. Similarly, if we can't send metta to ourselves, we'll find it very hard to send it to other people, and so on and so forth. Yeah, so the Metta Bhavana is really an entire system, and so you need to come at it as an entire system and actually do the whole thing. I'm going to say a bit more about that in the second half in terms of like general systems of kind of Dharma practice or Buddhist practice, and what it means to kind of commit to all of it, really. So I'll say just a little bit about the Metta Bhavana for those that don't know it, and then we'll give it a shot. So yeah, it's a system of well-wishing. So it's the meditation where we really look to practice and develop well-wishing to ourselves and to others. And we start that with well-wishing towards ourselves, love towards ourselves. And then we move on in the second stage to love for a good friend. And then we move on in the third stage to well-wishing to a neutral person. And then in the fourth stage, we move on to well-wishing for somebody that we don't get on with, that we don't like. And then in the fifth stage, we send well-wishing to all living beings. So what I thought we might do is let's give that a go. But we can set up for meditation, and what I'll do is I'll just talk us through. So if you don't know the meditation practice, don't worry, I'll talk us through as we go. And we'll meditate for about 20 minutes now, so why don't you do that? Okay, so just relaxing back into our postures. So connecting with a sense of groundedness. First stage of the practice, we're sending well-wishing, love, friendliness to ourselves. And one thing that we can do in this stage of the practice is just bring to mind things we're grateful for. Might even be things that we've done for ourselves that we're grateful for. Like bringing ourselves here this evening or anything like that. You're just reflecting and then noticing if there's any warming or opening up in your experience on those reflections, based on those reflections. You could even say bring gratitude to your hands. So you could bring to mind all the things that your hands do for you each day. And then moving on to the second stage of practice. So here we bring to mind the good friend. So somebody that we just have a fairly straightforward feeling of well-wishing towards. You can bring their image to mind, or you can hear their voice say. And you can bring to mind a characteristic, a quality of theirs that you really appreciate and you really like about them. reflect, may they be well. The third stage of the practice now, we just bring to mind a neutral person. So somebody that we might not know that well, and we don't feel particularly positively or negatively towards. Might be somebody we see on the bus each day, or somebody in the shop. We can just reflect, think on what might it be like to be them. They too, just like us, have hopes and fears, victories and setbacks. What might their world be like? And then through that imaginative connection, we can just wish them well. Dropping in silently to ourselves the phrase, may they be well. Moving into the next stage of the practice, we bring to mind somebody that we find difficult and that we're not getting on with at the moment. First thing we're doing is just relaxing into their presence. So just allowing them to be there in our experience. Not looking to push them away. If we find ourselves getting lost in a story about them, just coming back to the body, just relaxing and just allowing them to be there again. We can reflect that they too, like us, wish to be happy. And they too, like us, wish to be free from suffering. And from this common wish, this common desire, we can wish them well. May they be well. Final stage of the practice now, we just bring together the four people we've been meditating on: ourselves, the good friend, the neutral person, and the difficult person. And we just equalize our well-wishing to all four. Take that well-wishing and extend it out to everybody in the room. Take that well-wishing and then extend it to everybody in London or wherever you may be based. extend that to all living beings whatsoever. And we can just reflect, may all beings be well. And then we can just relax any effort we're making in the meditation now. Just sitting with the fruits of the practice. And when we're ready, we can bring the meditation to a close. Okay, good. So what we'll do is we'll just go for some tea now next door. So we'll set up for tea, and you can take your masks off once we get tea as well inside. So and then we'll come back in here for the second half after that. So we'll go do that now. Okay, great. So I'll just say a little bit more about this whole idea of kind of, I suppose, systems of practice coming as a whole. It comes a whole sort of package. Hey, come on in. Yeah, and the sort of the need to kind of, relate to them as a sort of whole package, the need to sort of pick them up as a kind of whole, as a whole package. Of course, that tendency can get too strong as well, can't it? Maybe that's a bit of a sort of caveat that I need to make. It's that, sometimes, one of the failings of religion has been sort of dogma, hasn't it? The idea that if you don't believe in every sort of last scintilla of what a church is teaching or what a spiritual teaching is teaching, you become kind of outcast in a certain sense. Is that everybody from outside, Brian?
Yes.
Great, okay. So I remember my mum tells the story of my grandmother being called into the school when my mum was going to school and when my mum was a little girl, because my mum refused to believe in the infallibility of the Pope. So the nuns who ran the school thought this was, internal hellfire for my mother if it didn't sort of get rectified very quickly. So they called my grandmother up and brought her in a meeting to discuss about my mum's failure to refuse and the infallibility of the Pope. The infallibility of the Pope, for people who didn't grow up Catholic, basically means the Pope cannot be wrong, right? It's a ridiculous concept. Yeah. It's what Catholics actually believe. That the Pope spiritually cannot be wrong. So anything the Pope says is 100% true. So that's where sometimes this whole sort of, this tendency, the need to take everything as one whole system falls down, because it can fall down, it can fall back into fundamentalism or dogma. So you have to be a little bit careful. I think probably we've now gone very much the other way, where it's like I was saying, we just sort of pick and choose things, and then we tend to pick and choose things according to our own sort of temperaments, our likes and dislikes, and then we're never really sort of made to grow in the areas that we sort of need to grow in. So, Triratna, for example, this system, this organisation that the LBC is a part of, very much, comes at things through a system of practice. It wants to see the whole being grow, the whole human being grow. That was very much the idea that Bhante Sangharakshita, the man who founded the movement, had, and he had a sort of built up a system of practice that kind of emphasized all being, all aspects of ourselves growing. So he really emphasized, for example, friendship, the importance of friendship. He thought that was like absolutely crucial for human growth, for spiritual growth. Really, really emphasized that. The importance of work, for example, really, really emphasized the need to actually, I suppose, engage in some useful, productive process of work each day, to get your sort of energy kind of moving in that sort of way. The importance of the arts and the imagination, really, really emphasized those as well. So it was a total blessing for me, I think, when I came into Triratna, because, I was in a particular place in my life. I was very isolated, for example, and I was particularly numb. Those two things that were sort of big problems. When I first started meditating about 11 years ago, I walked into the Dublin Buddhist Centre, very, very sort of isolated, very lonely, and quite numb. I'd sort of lost all significant sort of connection with my emotions. I'd done a pretty good job of burying them at that point, actually. And so what I desperately needed was not just a system of meditation, but I needed a whole system that was going to look at every single aspect of me as a human being, including my need for friends as a human being, including my need for a source of imagination and emotionality and richness and all of those sorts of things as a human being. I wasn't just going to get that from meditation. I could have joined a Zen group, for example, and it would have been good. It would have been fantastic. I would have learned to meditate and everything like that. But I simply wouldn't have got, what I got from, a system of practice that really sort of emphasized the whole being. Now, that's not to say that this system of practice is the best one and you have to do this one. It's more like that whatever we do, it's really good to commit to a whole sort of system, because that will look to bring all aspects of you up at the same time. It'll look to sort of grow you as a cabbage, if it's good. And there are lots of good sort of systems of practice out there. Look to grow you as a cabbage so that you grow out in every sort of way. It's slightly ironic actually, because I think what happens is that if you're particularly you cling to a particular sort of quality or emphasis that you want to strengthen, and that's really good. So say, for example, you're a really good meditator and you really just want to sort of strengthen that and emphasize that. If you don't bring up the various other aspects, like say, for example, okay, so in this system of 5 spiritual faculties, one is concentration. So you get very concentrated in meditation, or reasonably well concentrated in meditation. If you then sort of look to forget some of the others, say like energy or devotion, something like that, usually what we do is we not only sort of hold back the energy and devotional aspects of ourselves, but we also hold back the ability to concentrate as well, because these things don't sort of exist in isolation from each other. Our ability to concentrate is actually really, really related to our ability to sort of be energetic. Sometimes concentration in meditation is described as energized calm. So that's really what this figure of the Buddha kind of represents. It's sort of energy and calm at the same time. Now, we might be able to do the calm bit really well. We might be like totally kind of like chilled out and relaxed and everything like that. But if you want to be able to meditate, you also need to be able to do the energy. So if, say, for example, you have a really, really kind of strong emphasis on just concentration, and you just meditate for hours and hours and hours, your meditation is not going to be as good as if you actually looked at, say, something like, well, could I get my energy flowing with work? Or can I get involved in ritual and get sort of some devotion into my meditation as well? So you imagine if you have a particular emphasis on something, not only do other things sort of fall away, but that actual thing that you emphasize as well also doesn't quite grow in the way that it should, because it's not the other things that sort of part of the kind of ecosystem of a human being don't come along in the same sort of way either. So it's interesting, like the guys that you go in and you see sort of doing upper body stuff 5 days a week and have the big massive shoulders and really skinny legs, their upper body is also weak, like speaking from a purely sort of sports perspective, because so much of upper body strength comes from core strength and leg strength and everything like that. So they stay sort of weak, ironically. A lot of those guys, let's face it, this is, young men will do this. They want to learn how to fight or something like that. But they stay completely weak. Anybody that's been involved in martial arts or boxing or anything like that will tell you, power and strength all comes from the legs and the hips upwards into the upper body. So they don't actually do the thing that they want to be able to do, because they don't sort of recognize kind of physical functionality as a sort of whole. They think you can sort of develop it in a sort of isolated bit and then sort of have it work, but that doesn't work. So physically, the body doesn't work like that. And spiritually, the mind doesn't work like that either. You can't just sort of emphasize one aspect of your mind and have that grow and just sort of leave everything else behind. That's not how it works. You sort of need to bring everything up. So practically, I think the thing about this is just to emphasize is, I think really what we need to do with spiritual practice is commit to a system of practice. So commit to a sort of whole kind of system of training. And that doesn't mean come along to us here. For sure, come along to us here at the LBC because we're the best. And we're great, we're fantastic. And we do have a system of training that does sort of address the whole being. Much as I'd like you all to come back again, what it really means is commit to something. Do look to commit to something in life, whether it be your spiritual practice or, your family or your career, or whatever like that. Do give yourself to it. Do commit to it. It's that way that we sort of grow as human beings. We kind of commit. There's a little story actually about two monks. It comes from the Zen tradition, and they're two friends, and they go they go off. They decide they're going to join a monastery together, and they set out off one day, and basically they arrive at the first monastery, and they settle down, and they start to practice in the monastery, and they're going well. And after 1 year, one of the friends decides, okay, I've had 1 year here now. I want to go off and find somewhere else, see somewhere else, branch out, diversify, whatever it might be. And so the other friend says, okay, I wish you the best of luck, and he stays there. Now, after 30 years, the friend has gone around, and each year he's gone to a different monastery, and the other friend has stayed in one monastery and just practiced for 30 years there, and the other guy, his friend, has gone to 30 different monasteries. And he comes back at the end of 30 years, and he meets his friend. He comes back to the original monastery they both joined, and he said, geez, you're still here, I can't believe it. And his friend said, yeah, I'm still here. I've been practicing here 30 years while you've been away. He said, but that means that in 30 years you've just practiced in one place, whereas I've practiced in 30. And his friend says to him, well, that may be true, but in the last 30 years I have 30 years of practice, and you only have one. So you can see this idea that each time, actually what the friend has done is he's picked himself out and put him into a new sort of system of training. He started again. It's not like he sort of picked up and sort of carried that momentum into a different sort of school or training, because actually what he's done is he's started digging again. You can imagine the metaphor. Sometimes it's said it's much better to dig a deep well than 30 small ones. You can imagine what's happened there is all that he's sort of dug is 30 small wells, 30 small little holes. Well, somebody's actually that's dug a deep well at that point has hit water, and has actually started to, something of fruit has come of that. So really sort of commit ourselves. I think that's the most important thing to sort of emphasize with meditation, with spiritual practice, with life in general. Do just look to commit. You do see it in London, like East London, there's a lot of people and they've just not committed to something. And it's just, it does when you get into your 40s and 50s. I'm afraid to say it gets a bit tragic. You've never quite sort of given yourself to something. You've sort of picked up and gone from one thing to another. And there's no depth there. So don't do that, I think is the real. It's so easily done these days because we can live a sort of laissez-faire kind of like life, can't we? Where it's like a little bit of this, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But we don't get depth out of that. So really look to commit. The Buddha actually, he gave a sort of withering, a kind of devastating metaphor for people who'd not quite committed to something. He said, well, if you haven't earned money, or if you haven't, and by earned money, I think he sort of meant sort of earned some money, raised a family, taken on responsibility, had a career, that type of thing. If you haven't done that, and if you haven't made any spiritual practice, you're like a spent arrow lying on the ground that's missed its mark. You sort of think, oh, geez, that's kind of rough. But that's what it was, a spent arrow lying on the ground that's missed its mark. So it's a quite upsetting image, isn't it? It's like it's somebody that's just not given themselves to anything, and so has just sort of been left a bit kind of is a bit spent. So don't do that. Really look to commit to something, and commit to something as a whole sort of system of training. Sometimes what we do with that, I think, is actually, sometimes is what happens is our doubt gets in. If we're particularly prone to doubt, sometimes we come into something and we get a little sort of depth into it, and what happens is we start to come up against ourselves. Sometimes you get this, people in romantic relationships do this, don't they? They get like 6 months into a romantic relationship and they start to kind of get a bit deeper into that, and that scares them, and then off they go again. You get it with everything and lots of things in life. You get about a little bit in so that you actually start to come up against yourself. You start to be challenged by yourself a bit, and that's scary. And so you get doubtful and you sort of move on. So we sort of really want to, I think we really want to sort of avoid that generally. Yeah. And of course that will then be self-fulfilling, won't it? Because if, say, for example, we never quite commit ourselves to something like spiritual practice, Dharma practice, Buddhist practice, or whatever it might be, career, family, whatever it might be, if we never quite give ourselves to it, it doesn't work out for us. And then our doubts are then confirmed. So it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. We doubt it, we don't quite give ourselves to it. It fails on the basis of not quite giving ourselves to it. And then that's confirmed for us, our doubts are confirmed for us. So it becomes sort of, it's interesting, isn't it? Our stories become our reality. The type of stories that we tell ourselves sort of gets enacted out in our world around us. So I think really just want to say, from that, we'll do a bit of meditation now again. But it's the two things I think probably that are most important to take away is look to commit, and then do look to commit to something that I suppose somebody has sort of set out for us as a path that sort of that addresses all of us. And don't sort of pick and choose, kind of do all of it as best as we possibly can, do all of it, which doesn't mean that we have to become credulous or put away our critical thinking or anything like that. But commit to it sort of all kind of provisionally. I think provisionally on the basis of further kind of reflection and everything like that. And then once you commit to it, that's when the magic happens. Commitment usually brings sort of magic. It's when you actually sort of pull away the safety net, and when you've really committed, that's when things start to get moving. So that it's true in all aspects of life as well. Okay, so what we'll do is we'll do another little period of the Metta Bhavana, and then we'll go from there. So I'll talk us through again. For people who are here for the first time, we'll talk us through a bit as we go again. Okay. Just bringing our awareness to the point of connection with the floor, with the cushion. And coming back to a physical awareness. So just scanning the body, see if there's any tension crept back in. Just relaxing that if so. we can just come to an awareness of the heart center. So the area around the chest, around the heart. Bhavana, first stage. Metta, well-wishing for oneself. We can bring to mind things that we're grateful to ourselves for. So it might even just be bringing yourself here this evening. Just look to see if there's anything in your experience you're trying to push away, or you'd prefer wasn't there. Just allowing it to be there. Just turning towards it. And we can drop the phrases in quietly to ourselves. May I be well. May I be happy. May I be free from suffering. progress. And then bringing to mind a good friend. And here we can bring to mind a quality of theirs that we really appreciate. And dropping in the phrases, may they be well. May they be happy. May they be free from suffering. And may they make progress. And then moving on to the neutral person now. Again, here just bringing to mind somebody we don't feel particularly strongly about one way or the other. And also, I should just add, with all of these stages, bringing to mind somebody of the same age generally and same gender. So bringing the neutral person to mind and just imagining what might it be like to be them. Is it so very different for what it's like to be us? And may they be well. May they be happy. May they be free from suffering. May they make progress. And then moving on to the fourth stage. So bringing to mind somebody we don't get on with, at least at the moment. first thing that we're doing is just relaxing into their presence. So just allowing them to be there. Just not allowing a story about them to rear up. We can reflect that they too, like us, wish to be free from suffering. They too, like us, wish to be happy. And that everything that they do, much like everything that we do, comes from that shared motivation. May they be well. May they be happy. May they be free from suffering. And may they make progress. To the final stage, we bring to mind all four people so far. So ourselves, the good friend, the neutral person, the difficult person. Just equalizing the well-wishing to all four of them. Extending that well-wishing to everybody in the room. And to all living beings whatsoever. May all beings be well. May all beings be happy. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings make progress. And just relaxing any effort we're making in the meditation now. Just sitting with the fruits of the practice. And bring the meditation to a close. So that's all we have time for this evening, folks. Very good to have you here. So I'd say if that was your first time here this evening, definitely look to get back into one of the beginners classes that we do here. That will just take you through the metta bhavana and the mindfulness of breathing in more detail. So usually in these regular classes we wouldn't explain the actual meditation. So it's good to sort of go to a few of the beginners classes just to kind of will really get a bit more detail on how to do it and what it's all about and the stages and everything like that. So do come back and do come to the beginners class. And I'd also just say, just to end, just a bit about the LBC. One of the things that we really look to do with the class is to offer it for free to whoever's coming in, so on a donation basis. And the reason that we do that is we just want to move entirely away from a sort of economy of exchange where we get money and we give a service, much more to an economy of generosity whereby we give these classes completely for free and the teachers teach for free completely voluntarily, and the team here come and give their time voluntarily. And if people are in a position, we really, really appreciate any donations. It just helps us here with the centre to be able to reach out and give these classes to people who might not be able to afford them and really need them. So there'll be a donation bowl just on your way out as you go. If you've donated so far, thank you very, very much. If you haven't and you'd like to, it's really, really appreciated. Other than that, stay safe and hopefully see some of you here for the New Year's Eve. All right.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.